It's like you guys didn't shower this morning. You all smell badly. You all need to deplane right now so that other passengers won't feel uncomfortable. The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like a blade, loud enough for everyone in first class to hear. This is a health and safety issue. You need to deplane immediately. Her words hung in the air, thick with accusation, a stark reminder that racism hadn't died with the civil rights movement. It had simply learned to disguise itself with policies and procedures, even at 30,000 feet. The triplets, 12-year-old siblings named Maya, Marcus, and Mia, sat frozen in their seats, faces burning with humiliation. They'd showered that morning, put on fresh clothes, and been so excited about their first time flying first class. But to this flight attendant named Patricia, their presence in the premium cabin was somehow offensive. Not because they'd done anything wrong. Not because they actually smelled. But because they were 3 black children sitting where she believed they didn't belong. Body odor. That was the excuse she'd chosen, the coded language that had been used against black people for generations, the kind of accusation that was impossible to disprove and designed to dehumanize. But before we continue with what happened on Delta Flight 2156 that fateful day, we would want you to show your stand and displeasure against racism. So, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories on racism and discrimination that many airlines swept under the rug. This was Delta Flight 2156, scheduled to depart from Atlanta to Seattle in 15 minutes. The kids were traveling to see their grandmother, who just had emergency surgery. Their mother, Nicole Carter, had sent them ahead while she wrapped up a critical work obligation, trusting that they'd be safe, that air travel in 2025 would treat her babies with basic human dignity. But now Patricia stood in the aisle blocking their exit, arms crossed, her face twisted with disgust that seemed rehearsed, performative, meant for the other passengers to see and validate. "Ma'am, we don't smell," Maya said, her voice shaking, trying to keep calm the way her mother taught her. "We showered this morning. We're clean. Can you please just tell us what we did wrong?" Patricia talked right over her. "I've received multiple complaints from passengers. This is airline policy. You're being disruptive by arguing. If you don't deplane voluntarily, I'll have to call security." The threat hung heavy. Marcus pulled out his phone to call their mother, hands trembling, but Patricia snatched it from him. No phones during this process. That's interfering with crew member duties. Now all 3 phones were confiscated, sitting on Patricia's service cart, and the triplets were utterly powerless. Other passengers watched, some with phones out recording, but not a single person spoke up. Not one adult said this is wrong. An elderly white woman in 3B looked away when Mia made eye contact, her discomfort with the situation somehow more important than intervening. A businessman in 4A kept recording, documenting the humiliation like it was entertainment. The silence from every witness was almost worse than Patricia's accusation. These children were being publicly degraded, and dozens of people chose to do nothing. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes. They were going to miss their flight. They were going to miss seeing Grandma before her surgery. All because this woman decided they smelled, decided they didn't belong, decided that her prejudice was more important than their humanity. Patricia reached for her radio to call security, and that's when Mia asked the question that would break everyone who heard it. "Why do you hate us? We're just kids trying to see our grandma. If you believe no child should ever be humiliated like this, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes ended in the 1960s, you need to see what happens next. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also, tell us where you're watching from and what time you're watching right now. This story doesn't end the way you think. So stick around because you are about to see the most shocking moments of all time. But to understand how 3 12-year-old kids ended up being accused of having body odor on a Delta flight, you need to go back 8 hours to when their day started with so much hope and excitement. Maya, Marcus, and Mia Carter were triplets, 7th graders at Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School in Atlanta. Maya was the leader, always organizing her siblings, making sure homework was done, and lunch money wasn't lost. She wanted to be a lawyer someday, the kind who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Marcus was quieter, always had his nose to a book, loved science, and wanted to study medicine. Mia was the artist, constantly sketching in her notebook, dreaming of designing buildings that would change city skylines. All three of them were honor roll students, polite kids who said yes ma'am and no sir, who held doors for elderly people, who'd been raised by their mother, Nicole, to be twice as good because the world would judge them twice as hard. Their mother, Nicole Carter, was a single parent who'd worked her way up to become an FAA inspector, one of the few black women in that position. She spent her career making sure airlines followed safety regulations, that maintenance was done properly, and that passengers were treated fairly. She flew undercover sometimes, observing crew behavior, checking compliance, and making sure the rules designed to protect travelers were actually being followed. Her job was her calling, born from her own experiences with discrimination in air travel, from watching her own parents be treated as less than human on flights in the 70s and 80s. The triplets were flying to Seattle because their grandmother, Nicole's mother, had emergency heart surgery 2 days earlier. The surgery went well, but Grandma Dorothy wanted to see her grandbabies, and Nicole wanted them there. She'd booked first-class tickets, a rare splurge, because she wanted her children to experience comfort, to know they belonged in premium spaces, to never internalize the message that certain areas were off-limits to black people. Nicole was supposed to fly with them, but a critical aircraft inspection had come up at the last minute, something that couldn't wait. So she'd made the difficult decision to send them ahead, trusting that in 2025, 3 well-behaved children would be safe on a domestic flight. That morning, Nicole had woken them at 5, made them shower thoroughly, laid out fresh clothes, packed their bags with snacks and books and chargers. She'd braided Mia's hair, made sure Marcus had his inhaler for his asthma, reminded Maya that she was in charge, and to call immediately if anything felt wrong. They'd taken an Uber to the airport, the kids buzzing with excitement. First class, Marcus kept saying. We're really flying first class. Check-in went smoothly. Security was normal. They waited at the gate, Mia sketching the planes outside the window, Maya reviewing the flight details on her phone, and Marcus reading a book about cardiovascular surgery so he could understand what Grandma had been through. Boarding was smooth at first. They walked down the jetway giggling, found their seats in row 3, and settled in with wide eyes at the big leather chairs and extra legroom. The plane was new, clean, with personal entertainment screens and USB ports. A flight attendant named James helped them stow their bags, smiled warmly, and asked if they needed anything. Another attendant named Sarah brought them orange juice without being asked, told them the flight would be about 4.5 hours, and made them feel welcome. Everything seemed perfect. Then Patricia appeared. She was maybe 50 years old, blonde hair pulled back tight, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stopped at row 3 and just stared at them for a long moment, her expression shifting from neutral to something that looked like suspicion. She asked to see their boarding passes even though they were already seated. Maya showed her phone with the digital passes. Patricia studied them longer than necessary, then asked how they purchased first-class tickets. Maya, confused, said her mom bought them. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She walked away without another word, but Maya noticed her whispering to another crew member near the galley, both of them glancing back at the triplets. 20 minutes later, after the plane had pushed back from the gate but before takeoff, Patricia returned. And that's when she said the words that would change everything. You people have a body odor problem. After Patricia made her body odor accusation and demanded they deplane, the triplets sat in stunned silence as she walked away to consult with the captain. Maya tried to convince herself this was just a misunderstanding, that once they explained they'd showered and were clean, everything would be fine. They just had to stay calm, be polite, and prove they weren't the problem. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about hygiene. This was about something they couldn't wash away. The captain never came. Instead, Patricia returned with another flight attendant, a younger white woman named Jennifer, and their treatment shifted from suspicious to openly hostile. Patricia announced loudly that due to passenger complaints about odor, the triplets would need to deplane immediately. When Maya asked which passengers complained, Patricia refused to answer. When Marcus tried to explain they'd showered that morning, Patricia talked right over him. I don't need your life story. I need you off this aircraft. Her tone was sharp, dripping with contempt, but when she turned to help a white passenger 2 rows back, her voice became warm and friendly. Can I get you anything? Another pillow, perhaps? The contrast was impossible to miss. Mia noticed it first, whispering to her siblings. Why is she nice to everyone else? Maya squeezed her sister's hand, trying to protect her from the reality-sinking eye that they were being targeted, that their skin color had marked them as unwelcome before they'd even spoken a word. Other passengers were watching now, phones out, recording the confrontation. An older white man in 2C looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something, but when Maya caught his eye, he looked down at his newspaper. A young white woman across the aisle mouthed "I'm sorry," but didn't speak up. A businessman in first class kept his phone camera trained on them, documenting their humiliation like it was content for social media, but his silence said he wouldn't intervene, wouldn't risk his own comfort to defend 3 children being degraded in real time. Marcus's asthma started acting up from the stress. He reached for his inhaler in the overhead bin, but the seatbelt sign was still on. "Excuse me, can I get my inhaler from my bag?" he asked Patricia. She whirled on him with disproportionate anger. "The seatbelt sign is on. That means you stay seated. That's FAA regulation. You're not special. You don't get to break rules just because you think they don't apply to you." Her voice carried through the entire first-class cabin, making sure every passenger heard her frame this black child as entitled, as someone who thought he was above the law. Marcus's breathing got worse, his chest tightening, panic mixing with the asthma. Maya unbuckled to help him, and Patricia practically lunged forward. "Sit down right now, or I'm calling security. This is your final warning." Maya sat back down, hands shaking, trying to keep her voice steady. "My brother has asthma. He needs his inhaler. We're not trying to cause problems. We just want to get to Seattle to see our grandmother. She's in the hospital. Please." Patricia crossed her arms, her body language screaming authority and disdain. "You should have thought about that before you boarded this flight in your condition. This is a safety issue. You're being disruptive. If you can't follow simple instructions, you don't belong on this aircraft." The gaslighting was masterful, taking a medical emergency and twisting it into evidence of their unworthiness, their inherent problem behavior. Mia started crying quietly, trying to hold it in, not wanting to give Patricia more ammunition. Marcus was wheezing now, clearly in distress, but Patricia showed no concern, no humanity. She reached for her radio and called for ground security to remove 3 non-compliant passengers from first class. The words echoed through the cabin. Non-compliant. As if asking for an inhaler during an asthma attack was rebellion. As if existing while black in first class was the real violation. Maya pulled out her phone to call her mother, the one person who could fix this, who had authority, who would know what to do. But before she could unlock the screen, Patricia snatched it from her hands. "No personal devices during a crew member's instruction. You're interfering with my duties. That's a federal offense." She took all 3 phones, Marcus's and Mia's too, and walked them to the galley, leaving the triplets completely cut off from help, from their mother, from anyone who could intervene. The cabin was silent except for Marcus's labored breathing. Every passenger watched, and not one spoke up. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew someone was treating you unfairly, but you felt powerless to stop it? Drop a comment if you've experienced discrimination like this. How did you handle it? 10 minutes had passed since Patricia confiscated their phones, and the triplets sat in a nightmare that kept getting worse. Airport security hadn't arrived yet, but the plane couldn't take off with this situation unresolved, so everyone just waited in this horrible suspended state. The other passengers were getting restless, annoyed at the delay, and some of that annoyance was starting to direct itself at the triplets, as if they were the problem instead of the victims. Then a white passenger from row 5 stood up, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, and his voice boomed through the cabin. "Excuse me, how much longer is this going to take? Some of us have connections to make. If these passengers are causing problems, just remove them already so we can get going." Patricia nodded with satisfaction, as if his impatience validated everything she'd done. "Sir, we're working on it. Thank you for your patience. I apologize that other passengers' behavior is delaying your travel." Other passengers' behavior. The coded language hung in the air, making it clear who was at fault in Patricia's narrative. The man continued, emboldened now. "I paid $3,000 for this first-class ticket. I shouldn't have to deal with this kind of disruption. If they can't follow basic rules and crew instructions, they need to be removed. Period. A few other passengers murmured agreement. Maya felt the walls closing in, felt the mob mentality building, all these adults turning them into the villains of a story where they'd done absolutely nothing wrong. Maya's voice finally broke. We didn't do anything. We showered. We're clean. We've been polite. We just want to see our grandmother in the hospital. Please, we can't miss this flight. She might not make it through the week. Her voice cracked on the last words, tears streaming down her face now. Marcus was still struggling to breathe without his inhaler, wheezing audibly, his brown skin taking on an ashen quality that came with oxygen deprivation. Mia was sobbing openly, her 12-year-old mind unable to process why these adults hated them so much, what they'd done to deserve this public humiliation. Through her tears, Mia asked the question that would haunt everyone who heard it. Why are you doing this to us? We're just kids. We're not bad. Why does everyone hate us? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their phones, their magazines, their hands, anything but the 3 children breaking down in front of them. The businessman who'd complained looked away. The sympathetic woman across the aisle bit her lip but stayed silent. Even Patricia paused, something flickering across her face that might have been shame before her jaw set hard again. Maya knew what she had to do. She turned to the older white man in 2C who'd looked uncomfortable earlier. Please, sir, can I borrow your phone? I need to call my mom. Just for 1 minute. Please. The man hesitated, clearly torn between helping and not wanting to get involved. Patricia stepped forward. Do not give them your phone. They are not permitted to make calls during this situation. But the man's conscience finally won. He handed Maya his phone. Make it quick, he said quietly. Maya's hands shook as she dialed her mother's number, the one she'd memorized since she was 6 years old. It rang once. Twice. Then Nicole Carter's voice came through, professional and calm. This is Nicole. Maya's composure was shattered completely. Mom, she sobbed. Mom, they're trying to kick us off the plane. They said we smell bad. They took our phones. Marcus can't breathe and they won't let him get his inhaler. Everyone's just watching. Please. I don't know what to do. The cabin went completely silent, every passenger straining to hear. And then Nicole's voice came through the phone, no longer calm, filled with a cold fury that made the air temperature drop. Put the flight attendant on the phone. Right now. Patricia's face went pale, but she stepped forward and took the phone, confidence still in her posture. This is Patricia Henderson, senior flight attendant. And who am I speaking with? The response came like a hammer. This is Nicole Carter, FAA principal inspector. And you just made the biggest mistake of your career. Patricia's hand holding the phone began to tremble, but she kept her voice steady, professional, still convinced she had control of the situation. Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft, and I have the authority to remove passengers who pose a safety or comfort concern to others. These children have received multiple complaints about body odor, and they've been compliant with crew member instructions. This is standard airline policy. Nicole's voice came back through the phone speaker, and Maya had turned the volume up just enough that nearby passengers could hear. Standard policy? Let me ask you something, Patricia Henderson. How many of these complaints did you personally verify? Did you actually smell an odor, or did you just assume? And when a child with asthma asked for his inhaler, what part of FAA safety regulations told you to deny him medical access and confiscate his phone? Patricia's face flushed red. I don't have to explain my crew member decisions to some random parent calling in. If you have a complaint, you can file it through proper channels after the flight. Now I need this phone back to continue my duties. She moved to hang up, but the older white man who'd lent his phone spoke up for the first time. Actually, I'd like to hear what she has to say. I've been watching this whole thing, and those kids didn't do anything wrong. You've been targeting them since they sat down. Other passengers started nodding, murmuring agreement. A younger black woman in row 4 stood up. I'm a nurse, and that boy clearly needs his inhaler. What you're doing is medical negligence. An Asian American man across the aisle added, I've been recording everything. They've been nothing but polite. You're the one who's been aggressive and hostile. Patricia looked around the cabin, seeing her support crumbling, seeing witnesses turning against her narrative. She tried to regroup. You're all being manipulated. These passengers are playing the race card. I treat everyone the same. I've been a flight attendant for 17 years, and I have never discriminated against anyone. Nicole's voice cut through again, and this time there was ice in it. Put me on speakerphone. Right now. Patricia hesitated, then complied, her fingers shaking as she pressed the button. Nicole's voice filled the first-class cabin. My name is Nicole Carter. I'm a principal operations inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration. My job is to ensure airlines comply with federal safety regulations and civil rights laws. I conduct both announced and unannounced inspections of airline operations, crew performance, and passenger treatment. What you've done today, Patricia Henderson, is not only discriminatory, it's a direct violation of multiple FAA regulations and federal civil rights statutes. The cabin went dead silent. Patricia's face drained of all color. Several passengers gasped. The businessman who'd complained about delays suddenly became very interested in his phone. Nicole continued, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You accused 3 children of having body odor with no evidence, a historically racist trope used to dehumanize black people. You denied a child with asthma access to his medication, which is a safety violation. You confiscated personal communication devices without legal authority. You created a hostile environment based on racial profiling. And you did all of this while I was literally 15 minutes away from the airport, monitoring this flight as part of a compliance review. Patricia tried to speak, her voice coming out strangled. I didn't know. I was just following the procedure. I had passenger complaints. Nicole's response was swift. What passengers? Give me names and seat numbers. Patricia's mouth opened and closed. She couldn't, because there had never been any complaints. She'd fabricated the entire story based on her own prejudice, her own discomfort with seeing 3 black children in first class. The captain's voice came over the intercom. All crew members, I need the senior flight attendant to the cockpit immediately. Patricia stumbled toward the front of the plane, and as she passed row 3, Maya looked up at her with eyes full of hurt and confusion. Mia was still crying. Marcus was still wheezing. And every single passenger who'd stayed silent was now looking at these children with guilt written all over their faces. What would you do if you were a passenger witnessing this? Would you speak up, or would you stay silent? Be honest. Drop your answer below. There's no judgment here. We're all learning. Patricia stood in the cockpit doorway, the phone still in her trembling hand, facing the captain who'd summoned her. But before she could speak, Nicole's voice came through the speaker again, this time addressing the entire cabin. Attention passengers of Delta Flight 2156. My name is Nicole Carter, and I'm a Principal Operations Inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration. I'm also the mother of the 3 children in row 3 who have been subjected to racial discrimination for the past 40 minutes. I want everyone on that aircraft to understand what you've just witnessed. The gasps that went through the cabin were audible even over the phone. Passengers turned to each other in shock, mouths open, some saying "Oh my God" out loud. Maya, Marcus, and Mia looked at each other with confusion, turning to understanding, their mother's voice suddenly carrying the weight of federal authority. The businessman who'd complained about delays sank lower in his seat. The sympathetic woman across the aisle had tears streaming down her face. Other crew members physically backed away from Patricia, creating distance as if her career implosion might be contagious. Nicole continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. Patricia Henderson accused my children of having body odor. A claim she cannot substantiate because it never happened. This is a historically racist trope used for over a century to dehumanize black people, to suggest we are dirty, unclean, unworthy of sharing spaces with white people. She made this accusation loudly, publicly, ensuring maximum humiliation. When my son, who has asthma, asked for his medication, she denied him access and confiscated all 3 of their phones, cutting them off from help. She threatened to have them removed from the aircraft for the crime of existing while black in first class. Patricia tried to speak, her voice coming out as a desperate whisper. Ma'am, I didn't mean it that way. It wasn't about race. I had concerns about passenger comfort and safety. I was following the procedure. Nicole's response was devastating in its calm precision. What procedure, Patricia? Show me the policy that says you can accuse children of having body odor with no evidence. Show me the regulation that allows you to deny a child his asthma medication. Show me where it says you can confiscate personal property without legal cause. You can't, because no such policy exists. What you did was act on your own prejudice and then hide behind bureaucratic language to justify it. The weight of it hung in the air. Patricia looked around the cabin desperately, searching for support, for someone to validate her actions, but found only judgment and disgust. She started crying now, her professional composure completely shattered. I have a family. I need this job. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing. Please, I've been a flight attendant for 17 years. This will ruin my career. The words came out between sobs, but they rang hollow against the trauma she'd inflicted on 3 children who'd done nothing wrong. Nicole's voice came back, and this time there was something harder in it, something that spoke to every parent who'd ever had to explain racism to their children. You're right. This will impact your career. Because actions have consequences. My children will carry the memory of this humiliation for the rest of their lives. They'll remember the adults who watched and did nothing. They'll remember being told they smell bad when they were clean. They'll remember their brothers struggling to breathe while you stood there unmoved. And you're worried about your job? The captain, who'd been listening to everything, finally spoke. Patricia Henderson, you are suspended from duty effective immediately. Remove your uniform items and wait in the galley. We'll be conducting a full investigation, and your employment status will be determined by a review board. Another flight attendant will assume your duties. Patricia stumbled backward, her face crumbling, the full reality of her situation crashing down on her. Nicole's voice softened slightly, but only slightly. Now I'm going to tell you what happens next. This flight will depart with my children on board in their assigned first-class seats. The gate agent will return their phones immediately. Marcus will be given his inhaler. And when this aircraft lands in Seattle, there will be FAA investigators waiting to interview every crew member and passenger who witnessed this incident. This isn't just an airline matter anymore. This is a federal civil rights investigation. The cabin was absolutely silent. Then Nicole added one more thing, and her voice finally cracked with the emotion of a mother who'd heard her children sobbing on the phone. Maya, Marcus, Mia. Mommy's going to meet you in Seattle. I'm getting on the next flight out. I love you so much and I'm so proud of how brave you were. You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. Patricia was escorted to the rear galley by 2 other flight attendants, her uniform vest already removed, her face buried in her hands. The cabin buzzed with urgent whispered conversations, passengers processing what they just witnessed, some defending their silence, others openly ashamed. The gate agent rushed onto the aircraft and returned the triplets' phones with profuse apologies, hands shaking as he gave Marcus his inhaler. Marcus took several puffs, his breathing slowly returning to normal, color coming back to his face. The flight attendant named Sarah approached row 3, tears in her eyes. She knelt beside their seats so she was at eye level with the children. I'm so sorry. I saw what Patricia was doing, and I should have stopped it immediately. I was afraid of challenging a senior crew member, afraid of losing my job, and that fear made me complicit in your pain. That was wrong. You deserved better from me, from all of us. Maya looked at her, still processing, still hurting, but she nodded slightly. Mia asked the question that was on all 3 of their minds. Why didn't anyone help us until our mom called? Sarah's face crumpled. Because we were cowards. Because we valued our comfort more than your dignity. And that's something I'll have to live with. She stood and addressed the entire first-class cabin, her voice shaking but clear. I want everyone here to know that what happened today was wrong. Those children did nothing to deserve that treatment. And everyone who stayed silent, myself included, is part of the problem. We can't let this happen anymore. We have to speak up. Several passengers approached the triplets then, and what happened next was a cascade of apologies that felt both necessary and insufficient. An elderly white woman from row 2 came first, tears streaming down her lined face. I'm 73 years old. I lived through the civil rights era. I saw black families treated exactly like this when I was young, and I promised myself if I ever saw it again, I'd speak up. Today I broke that promise and I'm ashamed. I'm so sorry. A young Asian American woman in her 20s stopped by their row. My grandparents were put in internment camps. They told me stories about discrimination, about being treated as less than human. I should have recognized it happening right in front of me. I failed you, and I'm sorry. The businessman who'd complained about the delay stood awkwardly in the aisle, unable to make eye contact. I was wrong. I jumped to conclusions without knowing what was happening. I let my impatience matter more than your humanity. That's on me. One by one, passengers came forward, their apologies genuine but also highlighting the devastating reality that the triplets had needed their mother's federal authority to be believed, to be protected, to be treated as human beings worthy of respect. The plane finally pushed back from the gate, an hour delayed, and took off for Seattle. Maya, Marcus, and Mia sat quietly, holding hands, staring out the window at clouds passing below. Sarah brought them warm cookies, juice, blankets, anything she could think of to provide comfort, but the triplets were still processing trauma too fresh to be soothed by snacks. Marcus's breathing was better, but his hands still shook. Mia had stopped crying, but her eyes were red and swollen. Maya kept replaying the experience in her mind, wondering what would have happened if her mom hadn't been an FAA inspector, if she'd just been a regular parent with no authority, no power to intervene. Nicole called back 20 minutes into the flight, her voice softer now. How are you babies doing? Maya tried to sound strong. Ugh. They gave Marcus his inhaler. Everyone's being nice now. But Nicole heard what her daughter wasn't saying, heard the exhaustion and confusion and hurt underneath the brave words. I know you're not really okay. What happened to you was traumatic, and it's going to take time to process. When I get there, we're going to talk about everything. We're going to see Grandma together. And then we're going to make sure this never happens to another family. The rest of the flight passed in a strange calm, passengers subdued, the crew overly attentive, everyone hyper-aware that they were part of something that would have consequences far beyond this single flight. Maya looked around the cabin and thought about all the times discrimination happened when no one with power was watching, when there was no federal inspector to call, when black families just had to endure and hope they made it to their destination. Her mother's authority had saved them today, but what about everyone else? As the plane began its descent into Seattle, Sarah returned to their row one more time. When we land, there will be airline executives and FAA investigators waiting. Your mom asked me to tell you that she's boarding a flight right now and will be here in 5 hours. She also said she wants to discuss something important with all of you when she arrives, if you're willing. Would you have apologized if you were one of those silent passengers? What would you say? Sometimes the hardest words are I'm sorry, I didn't help. Drop your thoughts below. The plane touched down in Seattle, and as passengers filed past row 3, many stopped to make eye contact with the triplets, offering quiet words of support, business cards, promises to submit witness statements. The cabin slowly emptied until only Maya, Marcus, Mia, and a handful of airline personnel remained. A woman in a sharp business suit approached their row and introduced herself as Catherine Reynolds, Delta's Regional Vice President of Customer Experience. Can I sit with you for a moment? She asked gently. The triplets nodded, still wary, still processing. Catherine sat across the aisle and took a deep breath. I need to tell you why what happened today matters so much to me personally. My grandmother was a domestic worker in Mississippi in the 1950s. She cleaned houses for white families who wouldn't let her use their bathroom or sit at their table. When she finally saved enough money to fly for the first time in 1967 to visit her sister in California, a flight attendant made her give up her seat to a white passenger who didn't want to sit next to a black woman. My grandmother stood in the back of that plane for 5 hours. She told me that story when I was about your age, and I promised her that when I grew up and got into a position of power, I'd make sure nobody ever felt that humiliation again. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears. But today showed me I haven't done enough. We have policies against discrimination. We have training programs and diversity seminars and reporting systems. But none of that protected you. You needed that culture change to happen before Patricia Henderson saw you as a threat, before she decided you didn't belong. I failed you. The triplets were quiet for a moment. Then Maya spoke up, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. You didn't fail us. Our mom did help. But you're right about one thing. What about all the families when our mom isn't watching? When there's no FAA inspector to call? How many kids like us just have to take it and hope they make it to where they're going? Catherine nodded, absorbing the weight of that question. That's exactly what has to change. But I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. What do we do? How do we actually fix this? Not just policies on paper, but real change that means the next black family doesn't go through what you went through today. Maya looked at her siblings, then back at Catherine. You can't train away racism in a weekend seminar. It's not about watching a video that tells people not to be racist. It's deeper than that. You need to hire people who've experienced discrimination, people who understand what it feels like to be judged before you even speak. You need to create systems where crew members who speak up against discrimination are rewarded, not punished for going against senior staff. You need to believe passengers the first time they report mistreatment, not make them prove it 10 times before anyone takes them seriously. Marcus added his voice, stronger now that his breathing had fully recovered. And there needs to be real consequences. Not just putting someone on paid leave or transferring them to another route. Real accountability that shows discrimination won't be tolerated. Mia, the quietest of the three, spoke up with wisdom beyond her 12 years. And you need to teach people that watching and doing nothing is the same as doing it yourself. All those people with their phones out recording us cry, they were part of the problem, too. Catherine pulled out her tablet and started taking notes. Here's what I'm committing to, starting tomorrow. Independent review of every discrimination complaint filed with Delta in the past 5 years. Mandatory bystander intervention training, not just for crew but materials for passengers too, because you're right, silence is complicity. Policy change so any passenger who witnesses discrimination can report directly to executive leadership, bypassing the chain of command that might protect the perpetrator. I'm going to continue flying unannounced on random routes, experiencing what our passengers experience. And most importantly, I'm pushing for hiring people who look like you, who've lived your experiences, into senior leadership positions where they make decisions about how passengers are treated. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I can't undo what happened today. I can't take away the trauma you experienced or give you back the innocence you lost about how the world sees you. But I can make sure your pain means something, that it creates change that protects other families. Maya nodded slowly, then looked at her siblings. There's someone else who needs to be part of this conversation. When our mom gets here, she'll want to talk about what happened and what it means. All of us together. Catherine stood and squeezed Maya's shoulder gently. Your mother is extraordinary, and so are you three. What you showed today, that courage and dignity in the face of hatred, that's the kind of strength that changes the world. 5 hours later, Nicole Carter walked into the hospital room where her children sat with their grandmother Dorothy, who was recovering well from her heart surgery. The triplets rushed into their mother's arms, and for several minutes, they just held each other, crying together, releasing the trauma that had been building since that morning. Dorothy watched from her bed, tears streaming down her face, knowing exactly what her grandchildren had experienced because she'd lived it herself decades ago. Nicole pulled 3 chairs close to the bed so they could all sit together, a circle of family bound by love and scarred by the same generational pain. Babies, we need to talk about what happened today. I need you to understand some things. Maya spoke first, her voice small and broken in a way Nicole had never heard before. Mom, why did she say we smelled bad? We showered. We were clean. What's wrong with us? Nicole's heart shattered at that question, at hearing her brilliant daughter internalize racism as a personal failing. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing. What happened today is called racial discrimination. That flight attendant saw 3 black children in first class and decided you didn't belong there. She used body odor as an excuse because it's a racist stereotype that's been used against black people for over 100 years. It's designed to dehumanize us, to suggest we're dirty or less than. But it was never about hygiene. It was about her prejudice, her discomfort with seeing black excellence in spaces she thinks should be reserved for white people. Marcus, still processing his own trauma, asked the question that had been haunting him. Will it happen again? Are we going to spend our whole lives being treated like this? Nicole looked at her mother, and Dorothy nodded, giving her permission to tell the truth. It might happen again, Marcus. I wish I could promise it won't, but I'd be lying. Your grandmother faced this kind of treatment her entire life. I've faced it, and you might face it too. But here's what I want you to know. When it happens, you have the right to speak up. You have the right to say this is wrong. You don't have to stay quiet and accept mistreatment just to make other people comfortable. Dorothy spoke up from her bed, her voice weak but firm. Let me tell you something, babies. When I was your age, I couldn't sit at the front of the bus. I couldn't drink from the same water fountain as white children. I couldn't go to the same schools. People treated me like I was less than human every single day. But I never let them make me believe it. I knew my worth, even when the world told me I had none. That's what you have to hold on to. Your dignity is yours. Nobody can take it unless you give it to them. Mia, the artist who saw the world in colors and emotions, asked the question that cut deepest. Why didn't anyone help us until you called, Mom? All those people just watched. They recorded us crying. But Nicole took a deep breath. That's called being a bystander. Those people weren't actively racist like Patricia, but their silence allowed the discrimination to continue. They chose their own comfort over your safety. That's something you need to understand about the world. Most racism doesn't look like people in hoods burning crosses. It looks like nice people stay quiet when they see injustice. It looks like complicity disguised as neutrality. Maya, ever the future lawyer, pressed further. So what do we do? How do we make it stop? Nicole smiled through her tears, so proud of her children's strength. We speak up. We document. We hold people accountable. We use our voices and our power to create change. What happened to you today was traumatic and wrong, but it's also going to spark a federal investigation that could change policies across the entire airline industry. Your pain is going to mean something. It's going to protect other families. But Mia had one more question, the one that would stay with all of them. Mom, are we going to be scared to fly now? Nicole paused, tempted to lie, to protect them from that fear. But she chose truth. You might be nervous next time. And that's okay. But being scared and doing it anyway, that's courage. Your grandmother was scared when she marched for civil rights. I was scared every time I challenged discrimination in my career. You'll be scared sometimes too. But here's what I need you to remember. You belong everywhere. First class, business class, boardrooms, universities, everywhere. And when someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong, you speak up. Even if your voice shakes. Especially if your voice shakes. Marcus asked quietly, and if nobody listens? Nicole and Dorothy answered together, their voices overlapping with the same message passed down through generations. You speak louder. And you find people who will listen. You never stop speaking your truth. 6 months later, Maya, Marcus, and Mia boarded another Delta flight with their mother. This time, everything was different. The gate agent smiled genuinely, checked them in with warmth and efficiency. As they walked down the jetway, the triplets held hands, their hearts beating faster, memories of that traumatic day still fresh. But when they reached their seats, the flight attendant who greeted them, a young black woman named Jasmine, smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard. Let me help you with those bags." Normal. Respectful. Human. Maya exhaled deeply, feeling the tension she didn't know she'd been holding finally release. Maybe things really could change. Nicole Carter stood at a podium weeks later at an FAA conference, sharing what she'd learned from that day. That flight changed me, she said to a room full of airline executives and federal regulators. Not because I didn't know discrimination existed. I've lived it my entire life. But because I saw how easily it happened, how boldly it occurred, and how many people watched without intervening. I saw the gap between policy and practice, between what we claim to value and what actually happens at 30,000 feet when nobody with power is watching. Patricia Henderson was fired. The investigation revealed she had a pattern of complaints from black passengers that had been dismissed or minimized. But firing one person doesn't fix a system that allowed her to discriminate for 17 years without consequence. The changes that followed were real. Delta implemented mandatory bystander intervention training. They created a direct reporting system where passengers could flag discrimination to executive leadership. They hired more people of color into positions of power where they could shape policy and culture. Nicole became a consultant, helping airlines across the country recognize and address systemic racism. The Triplets story became a case study in training materials, a reminder that children are watching, learning, and internalizing every message society sends about their worth. At home one evening, Mia asked her mother the question that had been on her mind. "Mom, are you still scared to fly?" Nicole paused, considering her answer carefully. "A little bit," she admitted. "But being scared and doing it anyway, that's called courage. Your grandmother was scared when she integrated schools in the 60s. I was scared when I challenged discrimination throughout my career. You were scared on that plane, but you spoke up anyway. That's the legacy we carry. We don't let fear silence us." Mia nodded, understanding settling over her young face. "And if nobody listens?" Nicole smiled, pulling her daughter close. "You speak louder. You find people who will listen. And you never, ever stop speaking your truth. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can end? I want your honest answer. Not what you think you should say, but what you actually believe. What do you think needs to happen to stop this? More laws? Better training? Personal accountability? Cultural shift? Tell us in the comments. Do you think serving justice, firing that flight attendant, and changing policies are enough to end discrimination? Or is something deeper required? Here's the hardest question. Have you ever stayed silent when you witnessed discrimination? What stopped you? And what would it take for you to speak up next time? Drop your answers in the comments. I'm reading every single one. No judgment. Just an honest conversation. And if you want racism to become a thing of the past in our country and world at large, if you want to be like Maya, Marcus, Mia, and Nicole Carter, people who speak truth even when it's terrifying, people who turn pain into purpose, people who educate the next generation, then like this video right now and subscribe to this channel because we're not just telling stories, we're documenting a movement. We're creating a record that says we saw, we witnessed, and we refused to stay silent. Share this video so more people can see it and learn from it. Because every share is an act of resistance. Every comment is a testimony. Every subscription says this matters. Discrimination thrives in silence. Your voice matters. Speak up.